Good morning and welcome to Art 195, 3D modeling for 3D modeling for animation for the fall semester of 2021. Anyway, I'm going to continue today and finish up the lesson or the demonstration that I started on Monday on creating more complex, realistic looking surface textures rather than rely on procedures or just the preset materials alone. In this particular instance, I started with really one simple object. So if I were to switch to wireframe, you can see that I have a simple box. And the sphere that's inside it was used simply to demonstrate that when I added a transparent texture to it, or a transparent aspect to the texture, that you could actually see through the window panes. So let me go back to textured solid. And you can see, if I bring up the surface editor, that I have just three simple textures. One is for the ball, okay? And one is for the box, which is where I have the wood planks or the wood surface applied, and the window, which is the most important and the most complicated texture that we have here. Now, I switched. Now, with each of these, you can use something that we'll talk about later, the node editor, which makes things a little bit more complicated. But it's really this is really the way to go when you're creating really, really complex surfaces and the way most 3D modeling programs work these days. This is only available, by the way, in layout, or should only be used in layout, not in modeler. Notice that I created just basic surfaces for the objects in modeler, and I'm refining them in layout. All of the images that you do use should be saved in the image folder contained inside your content folder. I'm going to go ahead and close this. And let's break this down again. So let's look at the ball. We can see that I just left it as the principled BSDF texture. And if I switch to VPR mode, you can see it. So this is how it's going to look in the final rendering. And we can see that we have a bright, shiny, big ball inside our room here, the cube. Now, if I switch to the box, which is the remainder of what we have here, that I started off with a basic color was just simply brown. But what I wanted to do under T for texture is that I wanted to apply the wood surface to it, which is simply a JPEG, or it could be a TGA file. I believe Photoshop files are accepted now. They don't always work. But the JPEG or the TGA file format would be your safest bet. And what I did is I applied a wood JPEG to it. What's important, though, is that let's go, walk through each of these so you can see the choices that I made. Under layer type, I used image map. Now, under that, we have other choices. We can use a procedural texture or a gradient. And again, gradients get more complex. Procedurals is really what we've already used in many instances, but I'm using images right now. So that's the first step. I'm using an image, so make sure that it's set to image map. The second thing is blending mode, and it's best if you just simply start with normal, and that will project the image as is. Then after that, what you want to do is you want to determine, and we can adjust the opacity later, but you want to adjust what kind of projection type do you want to use. By default, it selects planar. Okay. Now, most of the time, which of these you choose will be determined by the kind of object that you're trying to project the map onto. If it's a flat two-dimensional plane, then you use planar. If it's like a Coke can cylinder, then maybe the cylindrical map type would be best. If it's a sphere, a spherical projection would be best. In this particular instance, I wanted that image to be projected on all of the 5 remaining sides of the cube that I'm not using, so I used cubic. If I use planar, watch what happens. Notice how it changes. Okay, and it just, if you look at the top here, it really doesn't project properly, or if we look at the sides. So if I were to add, maybe this would be a good time to, so that we can see the side here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add another light source. It would be useful anyway for to create a fill light for us. Security. I don't know what's happening with my computer here. Because with, you can see that it looks okay, but if you look at the top, you can see how it looks like it's kind of smeared across. That's what happens with the planar. And then if you can also decide too, am I using an X, Y, or Z axis upon which to project it? Okay, and each one will have, you just kind of click through them until you get the right result. By default, it's the Z axis that is used. But let me go ahead and add that fill light so we can see this a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch from camera view to perspective view. Let's zoom out a little bit. So I can see here's my environment light. Here's my camera. And let me go ahead and switch to lights, or we'll just add. So we have lights here. And I'm going to go to add, and I want to add a light. So I'm just going to add, I could add, there are any number of lights that we can work with. And I'm going to talk about this next week when we talk about lighting. But for right now, maybe I could add another distant light, but that's not a good idea. I'm just going to add a point light. Okay. And I'll name it fill light so that I know which one is which. Click OK. And by default, it puts it right in the middle. 0, 0, 0. And again, if I zoom out a little bit more, you can see the light way up here. That was the original distant light. Does it need to be that far away? No. With distant lights, it doesn't matter where it's located. It's only the rotation that will affect the position of this, or the placement. And in the perspective view, you can also see, when we zoom in a little bit, see by using the planar projection, how it kind of streaks along the top. So that wouldn't have been the best choice. So that's something to pay attention to, since I wanted it projected on all of the remaining 5 sides. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch to wireframe so I can see that point light inside. So I don't want light selected. I want the fill light selected. And I'm going to move it out like so. And I'm going to bring it forward a little bit. And there we go. So let me look at it from the top view. That will help me a little bit for the placement of it. And then we have another option available to us. So there we go. And this might be a little bit too much, but we'll see. Let's look at it from maybe the right view or the back view. Make sure that it's up on the side, about midpoint. And now let me go back to camera view. And now let's go back to VPR. And you can see that it's really blowing that out. That's just way, way too strong, at least for my purposes for this demonstration. So what I need to do for that fill light is make sure that I have light selected, fill selected, and then I'm going to look at light properties. And now what I can do is I can go ahead and turn it down. The light intensity is set to 3.14 lux. Let's make it 1 lux. And for our purposes, maybe that will work okay. So it's a distinctive shadow side, but we can still see some details in there. So, not perfect, but that works okay for us. So I'll close light properties. Now let's go back to the wood texture. So I'm trying planar, and that will work for certain sides. But if I switch, for example, to the Y, you can see how it's taking it and it's pushing it down through the Y, along the Y axis, and how that texture appears to be kind of a stripy kind of texture along this side. So that doesn't really work for us. So instead, if I switch from planar, if I were to use cylindrical and spherical, I'm going to get similar kind of results. But if I switch to cubic, it works perfectly. So that would be the next one that we'd work with. So that's just the box. And I'm done with it. It works pretty well. So the next one that we want to work with, and this is the most important one and the most complex, is the window. Okay, so with the window selected, again, we can go down the complete row or lineup of options that we have available to us. And if you're wondering what the E stands for in here, it stands for envelope. And that is, if you wish to animate a texture, that's where you would do it. T itself stands for texture. And again, that's where we can apply the image map or the procedural and a gradient map, one of those three. So if we go back and we look at the color for this, remember I had applied a green texture. So if I click in here, and if I want to see that original texture, I can go ahead and I can turn each of these off for the time being. So I can go ahead and check. And every time I turn these off, I'm not removing them. I'm just turning them off. Okay. Now, there are others that are still being applied. So we have our transparent map that's still creating that hole in there. And I also have a bump map for the frame itself. So let me go ahead and turn them back on one at a time so we can see what we're doing. So the first one that I am concerned with is the window JPEG. That's the first one. Then what I want to do is I have a wood texture that I'm using, and let's move this one up. There we go. So by moving that up, notice that it cuts a hole. This is the mask. Okay, so for those of you who have worked with Photoshop and you've worked with layer masks, this is precisely what we're working with. That if I turn off the mask, that image that I created in Photoshop had a white background with the tan color for the frame, and then I used a bluish color for the window panes. Well, that's what the whole image, that square image, and just to let you know that when you use image maps, they do need to be square formatted. So that's where that appears. It just stretches over the whole thing. And by selecting down here, reset, it will eliminate tiling, because by default, textures will tile. They'll repeat again and again and again until they fill up the surface. And if you don't want that, you'll select reset for both. And then you'll also select automatic sizing. And that will stretch it to fit. And then if that's not exactly the size that you're going for, then you can resize it. The default size for the scale for image maps is 1 meter. So it's not by accident that I selected a 1 meter cube and I used the 1 meter size to stretch it to make it fit. So that is the first image that we selected. Now I want to mask and get rid of that white area. So if I click here, you can see that now it's masked and I can see through it. I can see that green, but I don't want to see green anymore. I want to see the same wood texture that I used here. So if I turn this on like so, that works really well. But again, notice that I have a problem because it's covering up the window frame and the mullions. So what I need to do for that is that I need to then create another mask, a black and white image. And I click here, and this is the window mask. And that what that does is that covers everything up. Okay, that allows everything to be that it pokes a hole in that area, allowing the wood to show through and to hide everything in between. Now, the other thing that other kind of mask that I applied was a transparent mask. So under transparency, again, if I click here, and I just have one black and white image, and that image is of the window panes itself. Now watch what happens when I click, because sometimes you'll need to invert the mask. White is what cuts away, black is what remains. So if I click here, notice that it just inverts it. I click it back again. And then probably what I also wanted to do for the transparency on that particular layer is that I wanted to adjust the opacity a little bit. Glass is transparent, but it's not completely invisible, that I wanted some of the bluishness to appear. So I changed the opacity from 100% to 80%. So some of that color of the glass shows through. So that's where we have what we have for our transparent mask. Now, another thing that I've done too is that you have to remember, I typically kind of copy and paste each of these layers to make sure that all of the settings are identical so that they line up with one another. Because if they don't, then you're going to get kind of a misfit and it won't look correct. So I want to make sure that I'm using planar projection. On each of them, I change the image. But what I want to make sure is that the texture axis is the same for each and that the sizing is the same for each. Now, right now, because it's 1 meter, it's not an issue. It will not be hard to correct. But in future instances where you want to, where there'll be really odd numbers, you want to make sure that they match perfectly. So copying and pasting them and then substituting with the different image works best oftentimes. So there's our transparent map. So the next thing that I want to add to this, or I'll do 2 more of them, will be bump maps. It's typical that, bump maps and also reflection maps. Typical in with glass is that it's not perfectly flat because it is a super cooled liquid. You'll see ripples in it. And if you've ever looked at old glass over time and how it looks like it's actually kind of sagging and it drips, is because it is. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to add a bump map to it. And I did for the frame. But what I want to do is I want to add a bump map. So this is what I have here for the window. So let's go ahead and click here. See where we have that. And you can see for the frame itself, I added a bump map so that it sticks out a little bit. Now, if I click and then I invert it, it will look like it's inset a little bit instead of sticking out. And it's just a little bit. Actually, what would probably work better for this would be a displacement map, but a bump map right now will work just fine. So now what I want to do is I'm going to apply another bump map, and that's going to be, so I'll take this one because I want it to affect just the window panes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and Let's go ahead and copy this current layer. And then I'm going to paste, and I don't want to replace, I just want to add to the layers. Now, at this point, because everything else is set identical, I can go ahead and I can replace the image. So what I want to do is I want to use the wood or the window panes one. So let's find, here's the window panes mask. I will use that. I want to make sure that it's inverted. I don't want to use, actually, you know what? That will be for my mask. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this again because that's where I want it to affect, only that area. Let me go ahead and turn that off. And then let's go ahead and select it and copy again. And to get the kind of ripple that I'm looking for, instead of an image, I mean, we could use an image, but I'm just going to go ahead and use a procedural that will give me kind of the rippley quality that I'm looking for. So I'll go ahead and I'll copy this one, current layer. Actually, I'm going to select this one, copy current layer. And I'm going to go ahead and paste. And I'm going to add 2 layers. So it should add it up here. And I want to move this down right in between. So let's select. No, the mask goes above. I had that right to begin with. So I'm going to select this one. And I don't want it to be a mask. I want it to be, I'll turn this back on. And instead of map, I'm going to switch to image map. I'm going to switch to procedural. And it gives me a whole bunch of other options. And notice how it's looking kind of really ripply and really strange here. So that's the turbulence that I have here. That one belongs here. And it should only be affected in the window panes here. So I'm going to make sure that it's inverted. Let's make sure that this is selected. Window panes mask. Nope, that one, I don't want that. I have it turned around. So the window, yeah, this one should be, yeah, the mask itself, this one here, there we go. So the mask I don't want set to normal. It needs to be set to alpha. Alpha is what allows me to turn it into a layer mask or adjustment layer. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to alpha. And it should start to ripple a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and it's inverted. And now I'm going to go ahead, instead of 1 meter, this is really cranked up. So I'm going to change the amplitude back to the default of 1. And now I'm going to change the size of it. This will be because the ripples were too big. So I'm going to take it all the way down to maybe 200 millimeters and see what happens here. To get the ripple that I'm looking for. And I'm not quite sure yet if it's working or not. So that's the scale that I'm looking for the mask itself. Actually, you know what? I want, no. I goofed. I want the map to be 1 meter. So let me go back. It's the ripple itself, the turbulence that I want to change. Instead of 1 meter, this is the one that I want to try to be 200 millimeters. So it's not a big wide ripple, it's a little bit more narrower. So 200 millimeters. Let's see if I get a better look here. Yeah, it's starting to see the ripple in the glass. There you go. That might be too exaggerated. So instead of, 80% texture value, we can crank that back a little bit. It's starting to distort the glass a tad. So maybe instead of 80%, let's take that back a little bit. And I'm going to say 20% and see if that how that changes. And that maybe that's not enough. Maybe that's too much. I don't know. If I leave it as is, it would be okay. And you can see that it's rippled a little bit. But to really get the sense of this bump map that I've applied to the window pane, I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to reflect an exterior that doesn't exist. So to do that, we need to use a reflection map. So let's not refraction, but reflection. So here's reflection. So I'm going to hit T for reflection. And again, I want it to be reflected just in the window panes. So I'm going to go ahead and paste, and hopefully from what I had from before. So paste. I'm just going to replace all layers. And let's see what I have here. No, I didn't do it. So I'm just, because it's 1 meter, I can do that. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use the image map. I don't want it normal. Well, I do want it normal here. I want it to be, because I'm not layering it with any other map, so I can leave it as normal. Let me go ahead and apply planar projection image. I want to use the window panes because I only want the reflection to appear on it. Okay, but notice that there isn't anything being reflected. So what I need to do now is, let me see, I need to go into the shading model. And from, I have material and now the shading model. And now what we can see is under reflection, you can see that we have glossy reflections. We want it to ray trace. And then we want to determine here, what kind of map do we want it to reflect? So I'm going to click here and hopefully, hold on here. I want, instead of just ray trace, I'm going to use just spherical map. That's it. I would have the option if I want, and this is what I've done in my virtual gallery. I have it ray trace oftentimes what is actually there, and then also kind of a faux environment. So I can have it ray trace exactly what exists in the environment, but it's a black environment. It's kind of a black hole that we're looking at. So that's going to give us nothing. If I use ray trace and spherical, that would work too, but I'm just going to switch to a spherical map. Now, what a spherical map is imagine if you were to place a huge bubble around your environment. And inside that bubble, you have an image of the environment that you would like to be projected in your reflections. Well, that's what we're doing here. So under reflection map image, I'm going to click here. And I don't have the image yet that I want to load, but I'm going to go ahead and load an image. And I'm going to take it from classic content. Okay. And I hope I have that nearby. Come on, there we go. So I'm going to use the sandbar image that I used for Mike, that TGA file. And we'll go ahead and click and click. And let's see, it should update and we'll see what happens here. So that should be reflected, and let's change. Let's look at the reflection map. So let's go back to material. Whoops. And let's look at the reflection map, and you'll see that reflection is set to 0%. Now I want in here, I want the layer, if I have multiple surfaces or aspects of the surface that have different degrees of reflectivity, then I would change the layer opacity from here. But since I only have one, then what I need to do, I can change it because it's already set to 100%. I need to change the reflectivity here. So I'm going to go ahead and crank this up a little bit. Let's go ahead and instead of 0%, I'm going to say 20%. Let's see how that looks. It's not doing much. So let me click again. And I hope I have that right. Let's go ahead. I have image map, normal. I have the, oh, wait. Yeah. That's there. So it should only be reflected inside those window panes. And then let's go back again. I got to double check my settings here. Let's go ahead and select Glossy Reflection. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to crank it up even more. Let's make it really exaggerate it and make it a like a real mirror. I have 20%, but still something should be affected here. Let me make it 100%. No, 100. Okay, it's changing, but it's not changing the way I had planned. So let's go back in here. Let's change that. Yeah, see, it is working, but I want to make sure that it's affecting just the window panes. So it should really look like a mirror. Maybe if I were to switch and use a different image, that might help. Instead of the sandbar, let's go ahead and load a different image and try that. But you can definitely see when I change that, you can see the ripples involved in there. Let's try reflection of the mic JPEG and see how that works. Sometimes, you know, might be surprised some of the strangest reflections look kind of interesting. No, I got the ripple, but I don't have, let me go over it. Alpha channel, surface opacity, surface reflection, glossy, spherical map only, mic JPEG, refraction options, ray trace, smoothing, clipping. Okay, let's go back to the material and reflection set to 100%. Well, you know what? Now is the time to kind of to test all of this to see how the rendering is going to come out. So I'm just going to change my camera settings a little bit. And make sure that I have the camera selected. I'm going to go to camera properties. And let's look. I'm going to change this back to 100% instead of 200%. I've got HDTV 1280 by 720 pixels. Focal length is a normal 24. You might want to change and later on experiment with your final project with different camera types and camera angle, lens sizes, and see how that works for you. I'm going to make sure that I have minimum and maximum samples set to 8 and 16. That should work for me. I don't have motion blur or anything. So I can work with that. And let's go ahead and do a simple render here. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to render the frame and see how it comes out. It'll take a couple of minutes here. So this is where it's going to take a bit. Probably should have turned down some of the settings, but to get the basic idea of what's going on here. We can see already that it's coming out pretty decent, but the reflectivity isn't working like I had hoped. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to abort this. I'm going to pause my my recording, and I'm going to check the settings for that one more time. So yeah, so I've really messed this thing up now. And I'm not sure what I did. I hit a key and something really got goofed up. So let me click here. Let's check the transparency. That may be, yeah, transparency. So I'm clicking on reflection, but let's go into transparency and what happened here. So we have that. 80%. That's right. Well, I think I might be done for today because I have to go back in and I have to figure out what button I hit to screw everything up. Because notice that I'm looking through the whole thing. I may have on one of these accidentally hit invert and I didn't want an invert. Transparency, invert. Yeah, I don't know what I did. I don't know what I did. Let's hit color. All of these are working. So that's going to be it for me today. I will post this, even with all my mistakes, and we'll see what happens. I will correct them, and on Monday, before we move on to lighting and everything, I'll show you how I fixed it. But I need to take some time now on my own. Oh, wait. Bump height. Oh, that's for something else. I don't want that to be 500%. I want that to be 100%. So I don't know what button I hit because the rest of this image to disappear. Typically, it has to do with transparency, but I don't see where I've messed up. So unless you guys have any questions for today, I'm going to call it quits and correct my mistakes and then come back to you on Monday with the corrections. Then we can move on to lighting. Okay. And then next Wednesday, we'll probably start some videos on organic modeling techniques. We'll see. Oh, when is the toy assignment due? In a few weeks. Yeah, so that you have a majority of the remainder of the semester to work on your final project. Okey doke. The sooner the better, really. But yeah, I will put a due date up if I haven't already. Okay, well, I apologize for goofing up, but it happens and I will fix it. Okay, I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.